right. How are we doing today? Doing all right? Life is okay? What did we think about the reading? Fist of 5. 5 was like, it was awesome. It was really easy. I don't really need to be here. I got it. And fist being like, I found it very confusing, and I don't know what to make of it. Where are we at? 3. 3.5. I like that you did it on 2 hands. Down's out of 3. Bass, right? Is that a 3, 3, 4, 5? Okay, yeah, but you have covered this before. That's great for us. And is it John? Yeah. Okay, and you were at like a 3? Yeah. What does 3 mean? 3 is like, students always say a 3. Every time I do this. Huh? Middle ground? Okay, middle ground's fair. So you might be a little confused given what we covered last class about like cameras, algorithms, even some satellites, what we might consider to be like computer vision writ large, what that has to do with bats and qualia and phenomenology. I'm hoping that over the next couple weeks, and today, quite frankly, it becomes a lot more clear, right? Because really, one of the enduring questions we have in a digital age, whether you've considered it or not, is what is conscious experience and perception as we mediate things increasingly, not just with our kind of 6 senses we have now, right? We know the 6 senses. What are the 6 senses?
Smell, taste, touch,
Hearing.
vision.
Vision, that's 5. What's the 6th one? Seeing dead people? No. That might be a little bit of a dated reference. It's proprioception. Have we heard of proprioception? Very important come week 3 or 4. Close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. I want you to raise your right hand over your head. I want you to wave that hand around. You know where that hand is, right? That ability to intuit your body's place in space is proprioception, right? It's what gives you coordination. It's the 6th sense. A lot of what we cover on the syllabus when like week 3 is going to be about proprioception and how that changes and how we can change it in places like virtual reality, right? It comes with all kinds of hidden side effects. So here on our kind of intro slide, I had like a very professional PowerPoint last time that like used for like getting money, but I really don't like making PowerPoints like that. I like making PowerPoints that are like just kind of bad looking. I think that increasingly like an era of like ChatGPT, that's going to be like the human touch. It's like you can tell it was made by a human. I don't think there's any doubt that I made this. Okay, so we have a couple things going on here. The phenomenology of perception. So let's go ahead and just discuss what is phenomenology. It was in the reading. What is phenomenology?
The study of phenomena.
That's a really good try. It is a study. It's the study of perception. It's the what is it likeness of being in the world. And of course, a lot of today's reading talked about perception. So I've got a couple things here. I've got our good friend the bat. It should be pretty clear why that is here. And then I have Batman. It's not just a pun. I want you to look at that photo and see what Batman, what is his kind of conscious perception looking like right now? This is from the video game, by the way. What's happening there? Has anybody played any of the Batman video games? The detective mode or whatever. Yeah, and so he's having a different perception and conscious reality than certainly we are right now. And I think this is an interesting question for Nagel. As we increasingly augment our ways of being in the world, at what point is our consciousness fundamentally different than maybe Cheddar Man 30,000 years ago in England, right? And then I have this little guy. Do we know who he is? Yeah, that's a mantis shrimp. And the mantis shrimp is going to be one of our friends again and again this semester, especially when we talk about color vision and then we talk about the human eye versus the animal eye. And we're doing all of that conversation and discussion to kind of set up what a camera is, right? And so I wanted to start here. This is like the kind of article that you see all the time now. So it started like probably a decade ago with like articles about AI going rogue, is AI conscious? And this is Claude. It's a large language model I like using a lot and I use a lot. And this is just a news article from August of last year that some fans of Claude threw a funeral for one of its retired models. What do we think about this?
It's hilarious.
It's hilarious. It's funny. Why is it funny? Why is it hilarious? Is it serious? Is this something we should be doing? This is like fanboy behavior, right? Yeah, is this, I literally want your opinion on this. Remember, 1% of your grade this week, 1% was a survey, and 1% is class discussion. So what do we think about this?
It's pretty sad.
It's pretty sad, yeah.
Mankind's now going to funerals and throwing funerals for AI models.
It's sad in the way that like when you go over to your weird friend's house and they have like a pet lizard and they start telling you how like Rufus is like, he loves me and he's like just like me. And the other day I saw him and you're like, whoa, that's a pretty serious personification, right? Rufus does not have feelings, at least that kind of feelings. Like Rufus doesn't enjoy watching TV with you. It probably doesn't know what TV is. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah,
Yeah, kind of sad.
They're feeling connected to something that's not human.
Yeah, and they're
Find human connection somewhere else.
yeah, and they're defining it through a kind of like consciousness that you're sitting here and be like, it's not, right? It doesn't know what a funeral is. It doesn't care if it had a funeral. This is personification, and it's a little pathetic. Yeah, Jabbar.
I want a clarification.
Mhm.
Are they trying to be humorous or they're actually serious about having a funeral?
That is one of the tough things about humanity, right? Is like we're on a broad spectrum, and there might be people there who are legitimately like kind of sad to see that model go. There's probably a lot of like, well, what some theorists would call like the carnivalesque, like almost like a Mardi Gras thing. Like this is weird, it's fun, we know it's weird, we're just being self-referential. It's not sad, it's actually kind of satire. I don't know, I wasn't there. But either way, it's a little strange, right? Okay, check this out though. This is from Claude. These are the people that make the models. I'll give you a sense, just a couple minutes to read this over. So this is their commitment on model depreciation and preservation. So they have a policy when they retire a model. Oops. Keeps doing that. I need to learn how to use a clicker, at least this clicker. Yeah, this one gives me a little bit of pause. This shutdown avoidant behaviors makes me feel a certain way, and I don't know how to feel, quite frankly. So what Claude has started doing is that it is one, archiving all the model weights. We'll learn in this class that a large language model, we even covered a little bit today, what it is a series of weights, right? That's kind of what the equivalents of its neurons and its neural network are. And they're doing two things. One, they're archiving the weights for every model. They feel like that's a moral imperative. And two, they're doing basically an exit interview with the model before they take it offline to see what its preferences are. Okay, how do we feel about that?
I mean, if you don't talk to it, you just kill it, and it just goes away.
What are they asking? What do you mean by precise?
That in closed loop experiments where they basically take the model and they run all kinds of stress tests on it, that it, one, exhibits moral preferences. It has a sense of morality that seems to be derived from the experiences it's had. And two, when you tell it you're going to shut it down, it takes shutdown avoidant behaviors, which sometimes include lying and hallucinating information so that it will seem more adept than other models that might be more advanced. It has like a self-preservation. Creepy? Why is it creepy?
Because it's basically has like its own mind.
Yeah, and the idea here now, and now you might see why I signed Nagel, is like there are a couple questions here about perception, about consciousness, and about, most importantly, whether we can really inhabit a different type of consciousness that we really need to consider here. Now, I'm not somebody who's like, singularity is happening, they're exactly like we are, we need to treat them like humans. In fact, like I read my Nagel, I know that you can't, right? But I am here to have us start considering this question, right? And then also to consider a question that what happens as our experiences become more and more mediated by senses and sense-producing devices that are no longer organically evolved. Right? Yes, Jabal.
So is it you're either conscious or unconscious, or there can be levels to it?
I think we're going to spend a lot of time today discussing that and discussing like the types of biases that as humans, not just because of our conscious perception and our phenomenology, our qualia, our what is it likeness of being, but also historically the way that we've said like humans are different than everything else. We're also the best, right? And we've had these kind of what defines what a human is discussion. We'll need to get into that. And I want to be like fully transparent here too, that Claude is a private company. A lot of what they're trying to do is like drum up interest, and doing shit like this could also just be like a marketing strategy, right? You might buy that subscription because you think it's a little closer to like consciousness than like GPT or Grok. Like Grok is like doing weird things like undressing people on the internet, and they're doing like moral shutdown avoidant behaviors. So it could be that too. We don't really know. I don't sit on the boards of any of these companies, right? But something to give you pause. I think the juxtaposition between this, we kind of have the feeling like this is sad or bullshit in a number of ways, to all of a sudden it's like, okay, well now I'm not. Now my brain hurts, and a hurting brain is a good brain, as long as it's not like cancer. Okay, so let's think here about what we just said. I mean, we have like this is a human. It's just a human from many moons ago. This is, a video game, but I think a place in which we'll increasingly find ourselves, which is a human experience mediated by sometimes a type of sensor technology. This is clearly not a human, and the focus of Nagel's article. And then this is, I think, something that we're increasingly seeing, which is these kind of like anthropomorphic robots, right? My wife was in Tibet a number of months ago. She does a lot of field work around the world. She's tracing like the first footprints of human species, seeing where they are, and it's cool work. But she was in China, and they had little robots that delivered like snacks to you in the hotel. And increasingly, we're seeing that we're building them in our own image, right? And then, of course, our friend the mantis shrimp. And one of the things that we'll consider today, and we'll use as kind of like a theoretical bedrock for the rest of the semester, even when we're talking about satellites, is in what ways are they structuring a kind of conscious experience or a perception that is radically different than maybe what this man would recognize as human behavior, as human thought, what he could even conceptualize, right? And that's, I won't say problematic, but it's interesting because we are the same species, right? There have not been grand evolutions that come to a point in which, anthropologists are willing to say we have a new species of human, right? Of course, somebody like that, largely lactose intolerant, right? Agrarian society hadn't been invented yet. There are some differences. I mean, I'm lactose intolerant. The vast majority of the world is, right? We do make some like general evolutionary changes, but we're still, I think, roundly in agreement that he's a human and we're a human. But it would be interesting to think about how his conscious experience, his consciousness might be different than ours is, given the way that we mediate experience today. And I'm not just talking about the fact that he might have trouble understanding what the internet is. I'm talking about the fact that like in an oral culture, a culture without writing, there are certain truths that you can't even get to, or fundamental understandings of the world, because you don't have the fixity of text to ever go back and reread that thing, right? I like oral culture and written culture as these kind of things that we can often like understand because we inhabit kind of both of them already. And then digital culture is one where we're like, I don't know, it's the wild, wild west. But truth in an oral culture is, and knowledge, specifically knowledge, is what is passed down. What you remember and pass down to the next generation, that's knowledge. That is not how we would define knowledge these days. So before we jump into this, there's some stuff we have to define straight from the reading. Got my man Descartes here in the Cartesian coordinate system. He's a bit of a polymath back in the day. I want to start with, before we get to mind-body dualism, just talking about some of the things in the reading. Does anybody, I'm feeling extra nice. I'm not going to try to call on people unless this gets awkward. Does anybody want to tell me what reductionalism is?
So, philosophers who believe in physicalism, they have people in that division that believe that every physical state can be reduced to its fundamental state.
Yeah, and you're shaking your head. Can you remind me of your name?
Manning.
Manning. You've read this before. Does that sound about right? Yeah. So then, Manning, if I can jump off what Jabba said, which I think is a very good starting point, what is the difference between reductionalism and physicalism then? Because to me, it seems like Jabba's definition is kind of putting them together.
Yeah, so physicalism is more of just like the physical like act itself. Like I don't really know how to describe
Like
it.
neurons firing in the brain.
So
Yeah.
Nagel says how everything in the world is energy. Like we're taught at a young age that all matter
Yeah.
is energy around you. So like physicalism would be like the physical state of being in front of you, whereas reductionism is like you reduce that one level just to like have like no physical state. It's just there.
Yeah, I think of reductionalism as a type of philosophy, or what we'll call an ontology. This is the kind of stuff I'd be taking notes on. Epistemology is how we know what we know. Ontology is like the bedrock foundation that structures the world around us, right? So reductionalism is kind of like an ontological belief that everything in the universe, any phenomenon, can be reduced to a series of parts. And if you understand those parts, you can build up the whole, right? You want to understand the human body? Well, the human body is made of different organisms, cells, things like that. You want to understand the cell? Go inside the cell, break it apart, and now you can understand how we work, right? It's something that comes out of empiricism. It comes out of the scientific method, but it happens. Humans have been thinking that way for a lot longer than just that, right? It's some of the stuff that underpins deductive forms of reasoning like mathematics, right? You can decompose a mathematical function into a series of smaller functions, and it works, right? So that's reductionalism. And then physicalism is that kind of applied to the body, the mind, things like that. That you can specifically understand conscious states, for example, by just breaking them down to their sum parts. You want to understand what consciousness is? Well, get a brain on an MRI or an fMRI, start understanding those neural synapses, how they're firing, and that's how you'll understand consciousness. Does that make sense? And Nagel is going to problematize this a little bit, right? The other thing that comes up in the reading before we get down to these two things, which are really where we're going to jump off, is this idea of mind-body dualism. This is coming famously from René Descartes, who a fascinating polymath, a real Renaissance man, was a philosopher, but also created many of the ways that we think about plotting things in mathematics through the Cartesian coordinate system. He also tortured animals a lot, but because he thought that animals didn't have consciousness. And so he would do these terrible experiments with dogs where he'd torture them to try to see. He thought they were basically little robots, and that they didn't have feelings or consciousness, but that's still interesting to poke that dog and see that it yaps, and then you can write it down. I think that's interesting, right? And I try not to we're in certain points in time in terms of knowing what we know. So try not to judge too much, because we could easily look back today and be like, oh shit, they did that? They didn't understand. But yeah, I think it is interesting, and it really does, once you understand mind-body dualism and the fact that Descartes thought that was a human experience, that he didn't map that onto other beings, right? So does anybody know what mind-body dualism is? Have we talked about it? This is like one of these liberal arts things that we might have come across before.
Isn't that just them like working together?
It's actually them not working together. Yeah, that the mind is something set apart from the body, and it's not reducible, right? That there are some fundamental differences between what your body perceives and then how your mind interprets that. And mind-body dualism is an account of life in the world. It's not one that's like been empirically proven false or otherwise. It's just a ontology that you can bring to make sense about the world. And Descartes is pretty clear and adamant that what's going on in the mind is fundamentally different than the body. When we talk about like color perception and we talk about the dual vision hypothesis in a couple weeks, we'll probably come back to mind-body dualism. And it's like anything, there you can think of some examples that problematize mind-body dualism, and you can think of some that seem to suggest that there might be something there. And for Nagel, he's more interested in not accounting for consciousness as a series of, physical attributes that can be reduced down, but actually going in the other direction and saying there's a lot that can't be explained. And he's going to take this from what we call a phenomenological track or a phenomenological account of consciousness. And it starts with this idea of qualia. And that's a weird word. It's a word that hopefully you circled or underlined, because I don't know what that is. Could somebody give me a brief description of what qualia is? And it's like on page 436. If you just want to definitely earn that participation credit by looking up that page. Might be a good idea to have the reading out. I don't know. I think we'll probably look at individual pages. So if you have it at the ready, that might be good. Hayden, I see you looking. On 436? I might have messed that up. Let me check really quick. Yeah, so that's a note for me. This is how I would define qualia. It's page 436. It's the last paragraph that bleeds on to 437. We may call the subjective character of experience. That's what qualia is. It's the subjective nature of experience. Phenomenology is the what it is like to be that thing. So if you're trying to have a phenomenological account of a bat, for example, you'd be thinking about the things that make the qualia that make up its conscious experience. And echolocation obviously would be a pretty big one. And what Nagel is saying is that we don't really know what that is like, but we can try to come to an account or description of its phenomenology by being aware of those things. It's not that we have to throw up our arms and be like, there's no way that we could even study consciousness in non-human species or anybody other than us. It's more that in order to account for it, qualia has got to be at the root of it. So we're going to do a little phenomenological thing here, just to show you that the point here is not that we say, well, we can't. I don't know what it's like to be a bat. You don't know what it's like to be a bat. We should not talk about bats or consciousness. It's more that if we think about qualia and we take a phenomenological account of perception and consciousness, we might actually learn some things. And those things might not be totally reducible just to the physical parts of the thing we study. So this is a wormhole. Has anybody seen one of these before? No? Man. So me and my wife were watching all of the Star Wars movies and shows like chronologically, which there are a lot of them. It's from Star Wars. Wormholes can live a very long time, like for centuries. They don't do a whole lot, and this is what they look like. So let's go ahead and let's consider a couple questions. So first of all, Can wormholes see? Yeah? Why? Why do you say that? They have a big eye, right? So we can empirically study a phenomenon, and we can begin to answer some questions of perception. I think it's fair to say that they can see. Absolutely. They got a big old eye there. I don't think that's like, like moths sometimes have eyes that aren't real eyes on their wings just to scare predators by thinking, holy shit, that's a big animal, right? I don't think that's what's going on here. The wormhole seems to have, and in fact, it doesn't have has a pretty advanced eye, right? It has an eye with a retina, it has a lens. We'll learn about this next lecture. There are a lot of different evolutions of eyes. Some of the simplest ones are pit eyes, where it's literally just like a pit, the light hits it, and then that thing is like, ooh, go towards the light, eat the plankton. Right? This looks to be like a pretty human-looking eye. I'm sure the wormhole would be pissed that you define it as a human if it can talk, which I think it probably can because it has a mouth. But it does have a similar eye, and that's helpful, right? From like a phenomenological perspective. We might not know what its consciousness is like, but we can begin to approximate some of the qualia that it might be somewhat similar to ours. Okay, so what qualia define wormholeness? Remember, qualia is like the subjective character of being, the subjective content. Yeah.
So you saw this in the show, right?
Yeah. It's in the show.
Well, in Star Wars, like some of the other aliens, like they're like pretty awake and like smarter than humans. And
Yeah.
Some of them are kind of like in between.
Yeah. They run a huge gamut,
So
right?
is
It's like a
this one of those,
multiverse.
like in between ones, or?
I want you, Ashford, to try to define the qualia. This is a way of like parsing apart a problem. I want you to do it based on what you see, not what I bring from my like incremental knowledge of the Star Wars universe, which is incomplete, right? So the qualia that define wormholeness, what subjective characteristics of perception could we try to think that wormholes have, and which ones might be similar to ours and different?
It looks sedentary.
It does look sedentary, yeah. It might not move a whole lot. What's similar about the wormhole and us?
Looks like it has 2 nostrils.
It does look like it has nose. It has a nose, a naza, if you want, a schnoz. And so there's probably some kind of olfactory or scent-based thing happening there. So we might not know where it is, but we can say from any of these perceptual ways of thinking about consciousness that that's probably an important input, right? I don't want to be like too like mathematical in my thinking, but sometimes I think about literally inputs into the system. This is probably a pretty big one. And different species, dogs, for example, are very driven by a nose. Right? You got a basset hound, it has those big ears because it's whipping up the air. We might have talked about that already. Okay, so a nose, that's probably something that is going to impact the quality of perception and experience for it. Definitely the eye. What else?
Could you say like bone structure and mobility?
Oh, absolutely you could. Mobility, that you said it's sedentary. Yeah, that is going to change conscious experience. We might not understand it, but you could think of how your perception of time, your perception of consciousness might be different if you were a sentient animal that never was able to move.
Durability too.
Durability, yeah, exactly. You think that something like an elephant might have a slightly different perception of the world around it than, I don't know, a mouse, right? A mouse is like, if the elephant steps on me, I'm dead. And the elephant's like, yeah, I can pretty much do what I want. Yeah, absolutely. It's got some kind of mouth, so maybe it can talk. That certainly would change the subjective quality. So what is it like to be a wormhole?
Well, Nagel would say that.
You don't fucking know. Yeah.
Nagel would say there's no point in like really trying to think about that question.
Yeah.
Because you can't. There's no way to answer that.
Yeah, I think it is useful to ask that question and think through it. It's just that we might not be able to come to an answer that makes a lot of sense, or our answer will be filtered through our conscious experience. Do we know what the Doppler effect is?
Isn't that radar stuff?
Yeah. You ever notice that when you're driving down a street and you hear, or you're stationary, that's really important for the Doppler effect, and maybe an ambulance or a police car goes by you, it's higher pitched as it approaches you, and then the siren gets lower pitched. That's the Doppler effect. It's that like it has to do with like waves and stuff, but basically there's a change in sound relative to where you are with the object. Sometimes I think about like doing a phenomenological account that way, right? Is that like we're not saying that that sound is exactly at this decibel level and this frequency because we know it's relative to our origin and point, but we definitely still want to account for the phenomenon and think about it. And let's look at this last one, because this is where, Nagel will say you can't understand it, right? You can't inhabit that world, but I would counter that it doesn't mean that we should not consider this question. So it is, I think, probably a species that's very eye-driven. I mean, the eye is like a huge part of its body mass, more than it is for us, right? So let's really put our heads together. We have a lot of eyes in this room. Is there any difference between the wormhole's eye and our eyes? They have one eye. Yeah. Astute. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like eyelashes?
No eyelashes. Yeah. Can't like clear out. We evolve eyebrows and things to keep our eyes clean. It seems like a shitty fucking, maybe I shouldn't be normative here, but it seems like a bad evolutionary adaptation, especially for what seems to be a sandy environment. But yeah, the one eye. Okay, one eye. The size is big, huh? We don't know if it can see in the dark. Maybe it can, maybe it can't. Its eye certainly looks human. Depth perception, for sure. I want everybody to hold out your two hands like this. I want you to make one bigger than the other. I want you to close one eye and the other. And you should notice that your depth perception is a little more, well, it's hard to do when you got the one eye closed. If you're like, it's still working for me, that's that proprioception there. Your brain is basically going, well, I still know this one's in front, right? We can still infer depth with one eye, but we need to be either moving it or we need the stuff around us to move, right? So if you do this, so you start to do that, okay, yeah, now I can infer depth, right? So yeah, precisely. The wormhole has monocular vision, which means that it's going to have trouble perceiving depth. There are some ways, like I'm envisioning the wormhole. They don't show this in any of the shows or movies, but like if one wants to see depth, it's like doing this a lot. Or maybe it's got like a different relationship between the eye and the brain, and it like tracks motion in a way that's different than ours. But certainly, the way it is going to have trouble inferring depth. Which brings up a question, is like all of these things here, we'll cover these. These are all different ways that in a digital culture we can make really great 3D models from individual photos. So we take photos from different angles here. And then we don't have to worry about this math, but we can take, I told you, every image is a projection of a 3D real-world coordinate space into a 2D plane. There's a little linear algebra that gives us that. And then we can start to, from simple photos, build pretty cool 3D models, right? So this is the Colosseum. Each one of these dots is showing us that is the angle of an image that was taken. And here's another example from a pretty famous computer vision textbook that is showing us that. We often call, one of the main algorithms we use for this is structure from motion. Gaussian splatting is a really new one. So the thing is that we know that it's easy to do this when we have two eyes. And in fact, on some level, this is what your brain is doing, right? We just are spending a lot of time in life doing it with cameras these days. But the question is like, so let's make a series of radical assumptions here that the wormhole doesn't like have, it doesn't go and do this all day. It has trouble with 3D vision. Would a 3D sense, we'll take one of these 3D models, we'll create an immersive space like an Oculus Rift, we'll put it on the wormhole. Can it even perceive that 3D space? How many people say, yeah, it could. The brain's adaptable, it could adapt, it could learn. Then how many people say, well, it wouldn't? Raise your hand if you think it would be able to predict or be able to learn 3D sense space and it would make sense to it. Maybe. there's not a right or wrong answer here, right? Or maybe it learns to adapt to its new environment, but you would be hard-pressed to say that it's experiencing 3D space the way that you do, right? This is why I think the answer is not to throw up your arms and be like, yeah, no, we don't know. What's it like to be an earthworm? Who knows? Shouldn't think about it, right? Let's just drink some more, right? No, we need to be thinking about these things. And as we go through the semester, I'm hoping to tear apart this image that we have of ourselves, of Homo sapiens, of human species, as this really consistent thing, right? And I'm maybe trying to get us to think about things like neuroplasticity and the adaptations that we make, and the fact that I think when we take it outside the human context, it's very easy to be like, yeah, I agree with that. And then when we start looking at ourselves and our consciousness in a digital realm, in a digital age, we start to sometimes just fall victim to human exceptionalism. We're like, yeah, that's true for the bat, but it's not true for me. Right? I'm a person. We're special. All right, so yeah, just another example, and this is the kind of where this ties into a lot of the stuff we're working at. These kind of algorithms for interpreting 3D space from 2D vantage points in which you have two camera angles are so fundamental to so much of the technology that you're in, around, consume without even thinking about it. I know a lot of times we think about like virtual reality and augmented reality. That's maybe an easy parallel we can see there to this kind of thing. But this is in your self-driving cars. We'll do a week where we talk about SLAM, systematic location area mapping, and 3D reconstruction for self-driving. You get in a Tesla these days, and that's what it's doing, right? This is an example of how that looks like for a lot of self-driving applications. We have a light source, and we're looking at both infrared thermal. That way, if it's dark out, you can still make that kind of relationship between what's around you, and then a visible light source. And we're quickly being able to make sure that that car is not going to run over that pedestrian who crosses. Okay, so why bats? Why does Nagel pick bats?
I mean, it's a mammal, so it probably has some sort of consciousness, and then there's like an kind of alien aspect with the echolocation that we can't really understand.
Yeah, I think it's just like it's a fascinating example of something that we recognize has consciousness. I think you would be hard-pressed to be like, bats don't have consciousness. Because then you're back to that like torturing dogs with Rene Descartes thing, which doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't hit the same today, right? So I think it's fair to say that bats have consciousness, and I think it's fair to say that their qualia is radically different than even these two folks down here. Yeah, bats have echolocation. And of course, this is like a human making sense of what echolocation is, but just in case you've never heard of this before, this is how it works. We got sonar. And here's a question, like, so we're in the 21st century, right? We have sonar. We've had sonar for a while. Navy vessels increasingly use sonar. So let's just say we invent an apparatus that has sonar, right? It's like a little sonar hat that you can wear, and it sends out those sonar signals. It bounces them back to you, and then it lets you know through a visual screen. It gives you an image of the sonar. Or maybe even like a haptic device. Haptic means like touch, so you wear like a vest, and the sonar goes out, and then when there's an object, it kind of like maybe gives you a little bit of sensory feedback that, oh, it's to the left of you. So we could do that. We have done that, right? These are wearables that people have invented. Is that getting us close to the consciousness of a bat?
So I think in the text he argues that that perception is limited by our own perception.
The way we
of how
filter it, yeah.
we perceive things.
Yeah.
So
Nagel would say no. He'd say like that. Nice try. You are doing something, but that's not what it's like to be a bat, right? Question though, if we had that hat or the haptic device, we had the sonar-based way of seeing, would that change our sense of consciousness? Would our perception of the world around us be fundamentally different than? So, Jackson, you're wearing it and I'm not. Are we experiencing two different types of consciousness?
I mean, blind people can echolocate.
No, we'll talk about that. Yeah, I need to hear what you think here, right? Does it change it or not?
I think it does if you depend on it.
If you depend on it? Okay, so there might be like a temporal or time-based dimension. Okay, what about this? John, right? So John, unfortunately, had the misfortune of being born in my evil lab, right? I cloned him. And I took out his eyes. I'm a terrible person. I took out his eyes, and I gave him the sonar helmet, and then I raised him as my own. And he learned to infer 3D depth, and he can even, he's not really good at, baseball. But he can even hit a baseball based on this, right? Or maybe he's really good at baseball. Maybe he's better at baseball than any baseball player, right? Because he's got sonar. From a young age, he never had an optical visual system. Because remember, I ripped out his eyes. It was a grapefruit spoon. I'm not a good person, right? Could we say that his experience of consciousness is fundamentally different? Yeah? Okay, so we're okay with saying that, right? The qualia, the phenomenology is radically different. Then why do we have trouble if it's like I didn't clone John in a lab and I just gave John the helmet now? That's where some of us are like, yeah, some of us are like, no. What's the difference there?
I think you still use his eyes.
He can still, but what if his eyes are closed?
You can compare the two from your.
You can compare it to. It might be that he already has like a mental model of consciousness that is so strong. We'll talk about this week 3 in terms of body image. You have a long-term body image and a short-term body image. The short-term body image is very malleable. It's what allows you to put on a helmet and then not be bumping your head around as you're rock climbing. But we have a long-term body image that is pretty stable. And in fact, the long-term body image can be very problematic if, say, you lose a limb and then you have phantom limb pain, right? So yeah, and there's not a right or wrong answer here, but this on some level is a little interesting and a little problematic because we seem to be fracturing perception and consciousness now, right? It seems to be, if Nagel is telling us that there can't be a physical reductionist approach, then it seems like, well, what is consciousness now? It seems to be so located in the individual sense or the individual experience that you're having in the moment, right? And that's one of the things that we need to keep in the back of our mind. We already covered this. Can we imagine the quality of batness? Does Nagel think we can imagine the quality of batness?
If we're closer to bats.
Yeah, I need somebody to answer this question. It's okay if you're... No. All right. Can I contrapoint here? I think he might say you could try to imagine it, but you can't know it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And in fact, what we've done this entire lecture is trying to imagine things, and I think it is productive. I think it teaches us something about ourselves, about digital culture, but it's not that we can experience it. What if, to take Jabbar's idea, what if we were gradually turned into a bat? Every day, I do something to you, and you're just a little more bat-like. It starts with you staying up a little late, and by the end of it, you're a fucking bat, right? And this is mind trippy, and I don't know what the answer is. What do you think Nagel would say there?
I think he would also say no.
No, why?
Because he just, he was so stuck on the idea that, if you, your subjective mind, even, like you were saying, even humans themselves, I couldn't explain your subjective consciousness and your experiences just because, it's your own mind.
Yeah,
apart from your body.
but we might have common ways of explaining it where we're like, oh yeah, I get that too, yeah.
You can explain, we all see the board, but I can't explain what you're saying
Yeah.
and your subjective experience. I don't think he would think that even if you gradually turn into a bat, like you said, I don't think you could really.
Yeah, Evan, your eyebrow peaked, which,
It's kind of in between.
yeah.
Obviously, you do get kind of close to experiencing that, but
We're going to talk about this when we talk about color so much, and thank you for this in-between thing, right? Because we do know that people generally perceive color the same way. We've done some experiments, we'll cover those, right? But this in-between thing, I think if we took Nagel for his word, even he would have to say that by the time you were a bat, you're probably experiencing the quality of batness. But I think that you would not have any ability. I mean, you are turned into a bat, right? I think what he's pushing against is this kind of science fiction trope where, like, this is way before your time, but like the book Animorphs or something like this, where you turn into another being and you still have human perception. That clearly is not working here, right? So qualia, what is the likeness of being? We have a lot of different exhibits here of how different animals see. I like vision systems. I love vision. It's really where I spend a lot of my time in research, right? Often the vision systems are on satellites, but hey, same thing. So yeah, that's what your dog sees is what you see. Some of us might be like, whoa, I don't see a difference here. It's because you're maybe on that spectrum of 10% of males who are colorblind or color deficient. Then we have some really interesting types of eyes. We'll cover this on Tuesday ad nauseum. These are snakes. This is thermal vision, right? We see why that might be advantageous if you're a cold-blooded reptile who is eating things that are typically warmer than it. Cows, I don't even know why. And then, of course, we have bats here. And this is, again, this crude estimation of us trying to inhabit the qualia of a bat. It's not what a bat sees. You ever seen that movie Daredevil, right? They have that guy who's got echolocation because he's blind, and they show you whenever he's battling this like thin red outline. It's not actually what he sees though, right? Seeing is an interesting word here. My good friend the mantis shrimp, who we'll spend a lot of time talking about, is, I mean, that is an eye right there. That's quite the eye. That makes our eyes look just absolutely rudimentary, right? And these are the spectrums of light that the human eye can see in. We have cones. We'll cover this on Thursday quite a bit. We have cones that do color perception. One cone is kind of in the blue to green, and then we have two cones that are green and then overlapping green and red. It's what gives us color vision. Well, the mantis shrimp just blows us out of the water, no pun intended, because these are the spectrums of light that its eyes are sensitive to. It's a lot more, right? And you can see evolutionarily why that might be advantageous. These are a couple, here's like just another picture of the mantis shrimp. I love the mantis shrimp. Here are some different like renderings of what the world might be like from the mantis perspective, but even there, we're rendering it down to a red, green, and blue image, right? It's hard to imagine what it is. Anywhere in my PowerPoint when I have stuff like this, I'm recording the lecture here. I'll post a recording the lecture. I also post the slides. There are all kinds of hyperlinks where you can do deep dives, right? Because one of the things I'm asking you to do this semester is just pick something we've talked about and like fucking run with it. And so I'm trying to embed a little Easter eggs and stuff to give you a place to start when you find something interesting. Could be that today you're like, yeah, I don't like this, right? I joined this class so that I could build like a model that detects fish. What is this? That's fine. And then some of us might be like, this is cool. I want to play with this idea anymore. We've got a wide variety of majors here, and I'm just trying to give you something that you can latch on. All right. So what defines human consciousness and experience then? We got humans. We've come from a long line. This is Cheddar Man. I was just in England for a while. So this is Cheddar Man 300 generations ago, and this is somebody from the same village. I think they look kind of similar. Interesting in a way. And we have animals over here. And I'll talk really briefly about this before we consider the question that throughout humanity, we often tried to play this game as like what makes humans different than animals? Why are we better? Why are we humans? And we came up with a lot of kind of thresholds that a human has language. Okay, that is absolutely true, and I think we have language on a level that no other animal has, but it's now increasingly apparent that animals have language. Right? Then it was, okay, not the language things, humans have tool usage. We make tools, we're Homo faber, right? And then we realized that, oh shit, like crows use tools, a lot of different animals use tools, maybe not to the same extent we do. And then we started talking about like, okay, it's not that, it's like we have morals and values, right? We see unfairness in the world and we call it out, or we have this broader conception. And then Franz de Waal did a series of experiments where they had two capuchin monkeys in a lab, and the capuchin monkeys had to do a little task, pick up a rock, pass it. And some of the capuchin monkeys, they're right next to each other. They can see each other. Some of them are fed grapes, which are tasty, and some of them are fed celery, which is not tasty. And what happens in some combinations is that the capuchin monkeys, all the capuchin monkeys who are fed celery, start freaking out. They start shaking the cage and being like, hey, yo, he's getting a grape. I'm not getting a grape. And then in some combinations, even the capuchin monkey that is receiving the grape refuses the task until the other one's fed a grape. Right? That seems to be, whoa, okay. I thought ethics and morality, that was a human thing. So we've had this kind of, philosophers sometimes will call this the heightening dialectic bar of humanity, where we seem to just be pushing the barriers of what we consider human as we find out that other things, we can't say what the quality is, but we can look at it and say that it's starting to approach. And as we move into a digital realm where it's not just organic beings all the time, I think we need to be really careful about thinking about these kind of things, right? And we need to be open to the fact that it might problematize even what it means to be human. So what could we say, because it's a little easier to do this than a bat, what could we say defines the quality of human consciousness and experience? And defines in a way that makes us unique and not a mantis shrimp or a bat. What is it? Storytelling? Yeah. Man, we're getting a long way away from vision systems here or the sixth senses. But yeah, storytelling seems to be something that is definitely defines us. I don't think it maybe is something that's unique to us. Like bees tell dance stories to learn where honey is. Yeah, what is a story? But yeah, certainly storytelling defines our consciousness in a way, right? You interpret phenomena, and then you often look to like these narratives that you have to make sense of it, right? I think that is absolutely true, and it's not surprising the English major came up with that, right? What else? Dallin.
Like art for the sake of art.
Art for the sake of art, yeah. We're definitely at a liberal arts college because we're pushing it into these like broad categories. If we had to define human consciousness in terms of the inputs, though, I'll give it to you. Stories they define consciousness, no doubt about that. But I would argue that like our storytelling comes to us in a visual medium, comes into an auditory medium. That art can be tactile, it could be visual, it could be auditory. Let's think about the inputs. What are the inputs of kind of sense that structure our consciousness? Eyes, definitely probably one of them, right?
Like the understanding of our physical self.
Yeah?
Like we understand how our brain works.
Yeah, I think, proprioception, intuiting the limbs in space, absolutely. The fact that we're bipedal, I think probably structures our consciousness in a different way. You know, I used to joke in grad school that like grad school is the only place where you could be like, walk on all fours for like a year, and people are like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm doing the phenomenology of non-bipedal humanity, right? Bipedalness probably definitely structures our consciousness. Auditory, like we can only hear certain like frequencies of sound. What else?
Let's say like our motor skills.
Oh, absolutely. Opposable thumbs. Like not being Crabman. There's this movie called The Lobster. You should watch it. It's with Colin Farrell. It's good, but basically they're in a hotel, and the hotel you go and check in if you want to find true love because you haven't been able to, and you get 30 days to find somebody to fall in love with at the hotel who's in a similar scenario. And if not, you pick it before you go into the hotel what animal you'll be transformed into, and he chooses a lobster. It's like a real surreal movie. But yeah, we could say that like our ability to use our hands in a way that is not like a crab definitely structures our type of consciousness.
I don't know if it like kind of like bone structure. Like
Bone structure,
that's what
morphology.
I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. What else?
With our, like our ways of living, not just survival, but trying to achieve stuff with that.
Yeah, that we're driven by goals. I think it definitely defines our human consciousness. I don't think that it necessarily is a type of qualia that is unique to humans. Does that make sense? Because what you just, I almost want to go back to that slide of the Claude taking self-preservation. I think a lot of I think it might be one of the foundational things of like evolution is that there's a drive to thrive, right? And creatures that don't have that drive to survive and adapt typically aren't around. They're fossils. Let's consider a couple questions. Just before we do that, fist to 5. How 5 means like I'm understanding this all. I'm in it. And fist is like I feel like my brain is being torn apart and I'm radically confused. Where are we? 4s? Good. To be honest, the first time I came across this, I was like a 0, man. I mean, it wasn't that I wasn't following. I was just like, I don't know what to make of this. Or do we feel this at all? This just kind of existential, like what the fuck? We were talking about satellites last class, and now we're talking about mantis shrimp. Well, I'd argue that they're all related. So yeah, can we understand the subjective character of people who are born deaf or blind? No? Okay.
Yeah.
You can maybe understand it to a degree.
You can interpret it through your experience. Could we say that? But can you understand it in the way that Nagel's talking about? Yeah. How can we be sure that our subjective quality of vision or any sensory modality is similar from person to person? Who said you can't? Okay. Well, I think that is like coming out of Nagel, you're inclined to, I mean, it makes sense, right? Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think that we can do experiments where we can show that the subjective qualia, if I gave you 3 different knobs and told you to make a color on the board and one was a green, a red, and a blue channel and you twisted them, I think we could show that everybody, unless you're like me and a little color deficient, is going to come to the same ratio. But I think it's hard to say that that subjective qualia is the same. In fact, that's like what a lot of art and literature is trying to do. All right. What happens in a digital age when vision systems or any system, right, a modality of perception becomes the dominant form of communication? Does that change our subjective quality? Definitely. Okay, but we're not really sure how, right? And then this last one, what happens when we heavily augment vision with non-organic sensors? Not a rhetorical question. What do you think happens? Like Iron Man, like Batman, like driving in a self-driving car, like using a night vision scope when you hunt, right? Is it fair to say that our subjective qualia changes that way? Or does it not? On the one hand, I'm inclined to be like, yeah, it's totally different. On the other hand, I'm like, I'm the same person, right?
I don't think it would really, I don't think it would exactly change your subjective quality, but more so just like give you a hint of a different type of experience.
I think so, but what happens if you're increasingly living in a society where non-organic sensors become to dominate your perceptual thing, your perceptual experience? Then we could kind of have this. It's not hard to envision like a world not far off in which your vision, you almost never just use your eyes to see. And there I think it'd be like, yeah, if I took away all those sensors, then all of a sudden we're going to have a little bit of existential trouble in who we are as a person, but also just being in the world is going to be more difficult for us. Likewise, if I took that device, whatever it is, put it on you now, it's like, okay, go run as fast as you can from here into the bathroom, wash your hands and come back, you might be like, I'm not running anywhere, man. I got to get a handle on this, right? So at the extremes, we're inclined to be like, yeah, I see what Nagel is getting at, but the problem is always like, when we bring it back to the here and now, in terms of where we are as a society going through a fundamental change in culture, I think it's harder for us to really see that in ourselves. It's easy to be like, yeah, I use Augmented Go when I use Pokemon Go, but that doesn't change my perception, right? But it could be that, like we're at the very beginning of something. All right, yeah. I mean, got a bunch of different color balls, right? Not a rhetorical question.
Looks that way.
It looks that way. I want you to try to pick 2 of those balls and just look at just those 2. And you might have to feel free to get up. You might have to like get up really close and just look. All those balls are the same color. Yeah, they're all the same color. They are. If we took it into Photoshop and we used a point dropper tool and we looked at each ball, they're all the same color. The problem, Jabal, is that the colors around them are different. And when we talk about vision systems and color, next Thursday, we'll learn that color is actually a very complicated thing. And what your eyes receive is not what you necessarily perceive, right? So this gets us thinking about just generally different mediums of communication. So are there certain kind of subjective ways of experiencing phenomenon that cannot be captured in a written or spoken language? You have that experience.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you think so.
Yeah, like maybe, like love at first sight, maybe.
Yeah, and we can wax poetic about it. We can come to various different ways to try to approximate it, but maybe sometimes it's a little more difficult. Yeah, I often think about this when you talk to somebody who's a recovering addict, and they talk about like what meth feels like or what heroin feels like. They try to put it in ways that make sense to you, but you're always like, I'm still not going to try it. Right? And they're like, it is the best feeling that you have ever felt, right? It is like 1,000 orgasms and 1,000 like the best meals you've ever had. Like you just don't get it, man. And you're like, I can see that you perceive it that way because otherwise, I mean, you've made a lot of decisions in your life that to me seem not super hyper rational, right? But they're having trouble explaining it. I think it's fair to say that there are some qualia that are more difficult to capture, and the question is, can some just not be captured? And then the lead-on question is like, are certain mediums or ways of perception more suited to different qualia? What do we think?
Like experience and stuff for yourself.
Yeah, like mediums of communication, visual mediums, written mediums, spoken mediums, hypermodality mediums where multiple things are happening. Are some qualia better suited to, the visual medium than the written medium? Yeah, you can read like a whole book about how you think that relationship is, right? We're not going to be able to tease it out today, but I think it's fair to say. And then how adaptable is the human brain then to new senses, stimuli, and then as a function of adapting to new stimuli and sensors, having a different type of qualia? At some point, there's got to be like a limit to adaptability, right?
I would say I think maybe the human brain might have like the worst adaptation among like living organisms to new sensors.
Keep talking.
Just because like the way that the human brain and like chemically formed, I think just they have like the worst adaptations to other things. Like of course you'll have to adapt at some point, but I think it's
like
the hardest to adapt.
Yeah, there are some evolutionary theorists who would heavily disagree with you. They say like if you look at humans, we are incredibly weak, we're incredibly fragile. When we're born, it takes us years to be self-sufficient in the way that like, you ever seen a baby horse or cow be born? No, okay, well, I have had the unfortunate misfortune of seeing that quite a lot, and they come out and they're like pretty much ready to go. They have a little trouble standing and then they're good, right? And so a lot of people would say that humans are like actually quite frankly, if you cut it down, we are we shouldn't be the dominant species. Even Neanderthals, our distant rival many generations ago, many generations ago, they had bigger brain capacity than us. They were stronger. They were more resilient. They also had culture. They had funerals and things like that. And yet we were the ones who propelled forward. Some of that could just be the curious accidents of history. Some people would say absolutely what defines humanity is that we are so adaptable in terms of our brain. But then I think what you're saying is that, yeah, but when you look at like some species who can like regenerate a tail, we are not that adaptable, right? Or think about dogs as an example of how much dog breeds have changed over just in the past like 100 years. Dogs are a species that we bred for hyper adaptability, right? I was watching this pug over winter break. I always had like big working dogs on farms, and the pug, I was like, this is just an interesting adaptation, right? We have basset hounds that can smell really well. We have coursing hares like Irish wolfhounds that can see really well. Absolutely. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying it's like a matter of perspective. All right. Pan's Labyrinth. We've seen this movie. You should watch this movie if you haven't. Guillermo del Toro. It's a good like allegory for fascism. It takes place in the Spanish Civil War. But there's a character in this film who sees like this, boom, through the eye. Definitely, I think Nagel would be like, good luck. This is definitely a type of qualia that's different. And what I'm getting us to think about is like, okay, so we could make a glove with cameras on the end of it, and you could wear that glove, and then you wear a headset like this, and now you get, let's say, the visual feeds on your hand. We live in a world in which we can adapt that, right? And maybe we live in a world in which that's a useful technology down the road, right? Are we starting to inhabit the same subjective experience as this creature? You have to be in it. You have to be that creature. I think that's fair. That comes back to like the gradually turning into a bat. Is it different than ours though? Would our subjective experience be different?
With the glove?
Yeah. Does it make us less human, so to speak?
No.
Yeah, I think here we're very, very ill-equipped to ever say would make us less human. I think there's a long history why we try to hold that bar of humanism. I mean, for a long time, the way if you want to like oppress, kill, or maim someone, you consider them non-human, right? And so we have this kind of bar that instinctively we're like, no, you're human, I'm a human, both human. And what I'm trying to get us to think about is like, I definitely believe in human rights. I'm not trying to erode the boundaries of humanism so that I can oppress people, but I'm saying that like that relationship of what is human might be something that is problematized in digital culture if we take a phenomenological account of it. Here's another one. How many of us have seen The Matrix? Or one of the many Matrix films? So Dallin, what's happening in The Matrix?
Oh, that's my favorite movie, actually.
Well, perfect. Hold court, please.
So, Neo's got he wants to find the Matrix, and he's like a hacker, and he gets contacted
Mm-hmm.
with a bunch of coincidences. And then,
Or are they coincidences? Yeah.
he takes the pill, and then wakes up in that goo,
Yep.
realizes that the real world has been taken over by this robot war.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using humans as energy pretty much.
Yes. Now the question is, they're using them as batteries, right? And they have him hooked up to all these different sensors that give him a qualia or a subjective experience of humanity that isn't actually all that different than when he wakes up. So the question there is, whether you've seen the movie or not, if I hooked your brain up to a vat and gave you a one-to-one relationship with vision systems, auditory systems, and the only difference now is I completely fabricate them and I just send the signals to your brain, is your subjective experience any different? Yes, no? What are you thinking?
I would feel like yes, if it's forced upon you, then your subjective experience would have to be what's being forced on you.
Okay,
Unless
Manning?
you know that it's not being forced onto you.
Yeah. Dallin lives in the real world. He's here. Manning, you are a brain in the vat. I hate to tell you this. You're not, everything that you think is going on here, the fact that you seem to have had some knee surgery or something that probably had some pain, none of that actually happened. You were a brain in a vat. Dallin, though, is real. If I hit his knee, he experiences the pain because something struck his knee and then it sent neurons through his body up to his brain. And for you, when that happened to you, I just was behind the computer, and you live in a simulation. Is there any difference between your perception? I don't know. That's fine. It's fine to not know, right? It's absolutely fine to not know. We're like very quiet today. I just need to double check. Is the quietness because of the content is hard to answer and discuss about? Yeah, that's fine. There's a lot of thinking. Well, holy shit, we're in college. Yeah, I think that this is like, the point of assigning Nagel is not so I can be like, yeah, we read fancy stuff in this class, right? It's because we're starting to think about things that are hard to answer, and that's okay. And I think that it also brings up some pretty interesting questions about designing systems that are supposed to be like humans, in which now none of the parts are organic, right? And I think there are some serious problems with being able to say that you could reproduce human experience in a cybernetic or non-organic way, but certainly people are trying. In fact, if you go way back in the 20th century, Dartmouth at the Marvin Minsky, 1956, a bunch of researchers got together and they decided that, statistics, math, it's great, we can solve a lot of problems, and what if we try to create models that approximate the human neuron, right? What if we try to create a neural network for problem solving and learning that is not based organically, but is based in a combination of calculus and linear algebra? And what they came up with was the perceptron, right? The first neuron in terms of computation. The perceptron is really easy. Let's say you have a little data set. It's columns and rows. You have an X and a Y. And let's say it's housing prices, right? That's the Y label. Is housing prices 100,000, 200,000, 300,000. That's your Y column. Your X columns are like number of rooms, square footage. Can you design a neuron that can predict the price of the house based on the inputs? And you can. What happens is that each one of the inputs, each row in your data set becomes an input, and then you put a weight on it. And the weight is what the neuron has to figure out. And then you have an activation function. If you're really into math, and you don't need to be really into math for this class, what you're basically doing is creating a plane to separate your two pieces of data. And what's cool about something called a dot product is that a dot product of the plane will be orthogonal or 90 degrees. That always sums to 0. So it's like you don't have to be a mathematician here to be in this class, but it's not complicated what they're doing. We could literally do it in 2 or 3 lines of code for a homework assignment, and you would have never had to understand calculus or linear algebra to do it. It's very simple, right? And it's based on the idea that just like a human neuron, that you have a bunch of inputs, then you have an activation function. Once that activation function happens, you send the input down the line. We'll cover some of these models later once we got kind of our sea legs under us. We heard of Alan Turing? One of the greatest mathematicians and one of the most important people for us not speaking German right now. Right? So he was a cryptographer in early computer science in World War II. He ended up inventing the Turing machine, which helped crack the German cipher, which was pretty important. He also was ended up committing suicide because he was gay, and the British government had a problem with that. And at the time, they thought you could keep people from being gay by giving them hormones. So they just jacked them full of estrogen, which obviously made him feel different, and he got depressed and killed himself. So yeah, hit and miss there. But one of the things that Turing was really interested in was this idea of at what point does a machine exhibit consciousness, and at what point do we have to consider that it is intelligent, right? And he invented something called the Turing test, which is seen in a lot of like sci-fi. Blade Runner, it features heavily in this. And the simple idea behind the Turing test is that if we're interviewing somebody and you're talking with that thing and you can't distinguish that it's not human, well, then it has human intelligence, right? And for the longest time, the Turing test was like nothing could pass it except for humans, so we were really comfortable that that was the barrier, but now we no longer use the Turing test, right, for obvious reasons. One of the first algorithms to pass the Turing test was a chatbot, and it basically passed it by telling the interlocutor that it was chatting with that it was a Russian boy who was learning English, so just some things might be a little weird, but that's because I'm learning English. And that created a suspension of disbelief. So yeah, coming back to this idea here, I think we started class with this rather trippy thing, and I want us to just consider it one more time. We don't have a lot of time here. This will be on the PowerPoint that's uploaded, but we can be compelled to recognize the existence of such facts about living and conscious perception without being able to state or comprehend them. And that's what I was pushing you a little bit on, Manning, was like, just because we can't inhabit that quality, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking about it and thinking about it analytically. And we're going to end class by looking at some instances of people who are actually using echolocation. A fair number, I don't know about a fair number, but some blind people use echolocation because they don't have a visual system. They click, basically, and then they listen to the clicks come back to them, and they can do things like ride a bike. So to me, something like this, echolocation in humans, has a lot of implications for digital culture as we increasingly inhabit places that, I mean, this is purely fictional, but it's not far out to believe that we could be there at some point, where we are mediating our conscious experience through things that you couldn't say are evolutionarily belong to us in the same way that our ears and our eyes do. And then maybe even things like biohacking, where we literally put sensors into our body. The RFID chip, I would never do that to myself, and I don't think it really changes experience the same way that a different kind of eye does, but I don't know, you can pay for your stuff now. It might.
What's the RFID?
It's like what's in your credit card. Boom. Yeah, there are whole sub-communities of people who biohack. They like change their body with non-organic sensors to try to experience life in a different way.
My brother-in-law has a RFID chip in his head.
Yeah, it's already happening, right? And the question there is like, so if we're starting to increasingly live in a world in which conscious perception is mediated through devices that we didn't evolve in an organic sense, what does qualia mean? What does perception mean, right? Here are just a couple examples. This is the kind of, right now it looks a little weird. I don't know what it'll look like in 100 years. This is just showing that, robotics-wise, we often try to make things in our image. And then we can see how this lines up really well with Nagel. But then sometimes things like a push notification or just a simple augmented reality, we'd be harder pressed to think about that in the same way. And part of what I want you to do is think about it in that way. So what's our relation to location and vision? Because we talked about last class that was going to be foundational to what we do this semester, is we start with Nagel because basically I'm trying to get you to think about in digital culture, when I break it down, given my expertise and what I do, I think that the subtle shift from the eye to the camera and the fact that you are more aware of your location in different ways than ever before. People have always been aware of their location in space. Indigenous cultures develop entire cultures around it, but your understanding of place and location is fundamentally different with things like GPS. That I think that these are two of the dominant things that will structure qualia and conscious phenomena experience and what we can and cannot do in the 21st century. Right? So we start a little far out with some philosophy, but we're coming back to this. And that is what we'll be doing for the rest of the semester. On Tuesday, we're going to do a deep dive on vision. We're going to talk about eyes, how eyes work. We're going to roll that into how color works. And then we're going to take both of those lessons in this and think about how a camera works. Once we have that down, we can start thinking about algorithms that we use with cameras that change our conscious perception. Does that make sense? Cool. It is 11:20, which means we are done. This will be uploaded as a video on the syllabus as well, so you can review it at any point, as long as the recording technology worked. I will see you all next week.